the swastika is present there carved into stones. And we know that Hitler had gone to those locations. And so what was scary was that they were using, and I think what you just said really hit the nail on the head. I think that's why sites like Ionis and other sites around Lake Vaughan are such a danger to the outside world, because they could rewrite a lot of our thinking. And not only that, but so many of the symbols and the teachings relate to core concepts we see in ancient civilizations, but even philosophy and other things. There's so much carryover that I think that it could significantly rock the boat with such established narratives and teachings that are such an integral part of us now, and that mindset would be extremely dangerous. Yes. And I think that has played out in some very nefarious ways in the ancient history of these places. And I could give you some examples.
Please.
When I was digging into these, I discovered some very concerning aspects that has occurred here, which is why I think most of the world doesn't know about these sites yet. There was a paper written by Cambridge University that I have that was written like 30, 40 years ago. And it was discussing a specific type site called Topercali. It's right along Lake Vaughan. It's one of the sites I talk about.
Topor. Is that right?
Yeah, Topercali. I can give you it later. But okay. Topercali was the first place that got my attention with a site that was deliberately dismantled. Dismantled.
How do we know that?
Well, that was the whole premise behind the university paper from Cambridge, was discussing that a number of the megalithic blocks that were on the basis of these temples had been removed and moved to undisclosed locations and disappeared. Like basically
by the researchers.
Yes. And so the more that I started digging into it, the more that I found that it had all occurred in this certain time period of history. During the 1960s, the late 50s and 1960s, these sites were all discovered around the same time. There was a number of them: Asvar-Natepe, Kef Kalesi, Topercali, and then some potential other ones as well, Kyla Deer, and some other ones that had images taken of them, black and white images when they were first found. And as I dug into and went into further, I found that many of them, none those bases and those temple stones and that made up the original sites were no longer present. Mm-hmm. And I asked some archaeologists on some of my trips, and they gave the answer. I asked why they would remove stones from the sites, and they said it was to protect them. And
that's never a good answer.
And so it really brought up some serious questions, and I'm writing about it in the new book. I'm in the middle of writing it now, and we're investigating, exploring it. And I'm not trying to say archaeologists that are there today. I want to make this very, very clear. I am not saying that archaeologists that are working on these sites today had anything to do with that time period. I want to make that super clear. Whatever happened in the late 50s and 60s seemed as though there was, again, like I said, 3 or 4 of these sites I've determined were deliberately dismantled and removed, and then their contents disappeared from history and was never seen again. And some of those groups that were involved were places like the British Museum and some other archaeological institutions who are highly prized and valued today. And it begs the question of whether or not there was a complication that was determined that was contradicting a previous mindset of thinking. This is where I'm getting into the road of what we were just saying, is if you come into a place with a predetermined history of thinking, this is all your Artians, let's go excavate these sites, and you find a number of pieces of evidence that point towards a completely different time period that is not your Artian, that's mysterious, that has symbols of like ancient symbols from pre-Knights Templar, all these things like chalice, all these symbols would there be interest from different places to not allow the world to know about that?
How did you find this paper?
I dug it up through working with my colleagues, and I can send you the paper
Please. Yeah,
right after we're done this that actually talks about it, and I've highlighted the areas that it does, where it was proven in the paper that after a certain time period, and I can paraphrase, and essentially it says after by 1970, very little, if none of the original foundation stones existed any longer.
Alessi, can we make a note to put a link to this in the description when Matt sends this so that people can check this out?
I can pull it up.
Yeah. But we'll pull it up.
I'll pull it up after. I don't have the exact name off my head.
One of the things I'm thinking about, though, Matt, and this is pure speculation. This is based on zero evidence. I'm just listening to what you say right now. It's curious the years where this is happening, the 50s, 60s, right into the 70s, because it's after World War II.
Yeah.
And what I wonder is if there was a paranoia, I mean, this exists at high levels, that new discoveries of ancient history could give rise to a bastardization of that said history that could be utilized by someone to come along like a Hitler, because we know Hitler was like obsessed with ancient history and some other things as well, and then bastardized that into these crazy race laws and all this stuff he had. And I wonder if the world, the order of the world, so to speak, coming out on the other side of that was, paranoid about maybe something like that occurring. It doesn't make it right what they did, to be clear, but I'm wondering if that had something to do with it.
I think it might have, and I'll give you an example. One of the foundation symbols of the Nazis was the swastika.
Yes.
The swastika came from ancient civilizations. If you go to the site called Baalbek in Lebanon, an ancient megalithic site, giant blocks, the second largest blocks in the world, up to 1,200 tons each. Mm-hmm. They're massive. I'm sure you've heard of Baalbek.
Oh yeah.
The swastika is present there carved into stones, and we know that Hitler had gone to those locations. And so what was scary was that they were using important ancient symbols that had to do with spiritual, metaphysical concepts, and then bringing them into like a very demonic, nefarious kind of way.
They bastardized it.
Yeah, they definitely bastardized it. And could that have been a concern of others? That may have been one of the aspects of this, is the worry of that, and the worry of how the ideology might change religious concepts, archaeological concepts. Mm-hmm. It basically, if you have a situation where you don't have an interconnected world yet, 50s and 60s, there was no checks and balances. There were some,
but compared to today,
now, you could do a lot more things.
Yeah,
it's very concerning to think that there were deliberate things that might have been hidden because they didn't go along with the narrative. And I'll give you an example. There was a site called Azarinatepe that is right in that area, and there were these massive steles found. Huge. Steles, these long, tall column pillars that are single stones, multi-tons, beautifully carved, very precise. They are in the Von Museum now, but the Von Museum took 20 years for them to obtain them. You know where they were before? In a military base.
Where?
There's a military base right below Azarinatepe. They built this military bunkers and these huge military place right around this ancient site, which is really strange. And guess where they also built a barracks? Right around Toperkali as well. They built
are these American bases over there?
These are Turkish military sites that they had built around ancient history areas. And they had artifacts in some of these bases that became known, and then museums wanted to obtain them to preserve them, and it was extremely difficult to do that. But why? If you're a military place, why would you have artifacts stored there?
Yeah, the storage of the artifacts that part's interesting.
Storage for something like many years, like over 20 years.
Yeah, that part's a little weird.
I'll give you another example. When they were at Kefkalesi and they unearthed these huge bas reliefs. The first one that was the best preserved ended up in a museum, the garden outside for 20 years before it ended up inside a museum, outside, just sitting outside. It was like these places and these things, they were hiding them and they didn't want these things being found. The Cambridge article, University article, pointing and showing evidence that they were dismantled and removed from the sites is completely unorthodox from archaeology standpoint. You can only remove artifacts to preserve them in a museum setting to study them. You don't remove entire temples. You don't remove entire structures. And then more importantly, to have them disappear and we still don't know where some of them are is very bizarre. There's another site called Yasiliak that's right next to it that has the same type of pillars that were found that were brought to the museum, but the first ones ended up in a military base. And I want to point another place out. And again, the world doesn't even know about these yet. I've stumbled upon something that's very significant. There's a site called Kaya that was flooded under a reservoir in the 1970s and 80s. It's now on the bottom of a reservoir. You can't even study that site anymore. Very interesting that these certain things have happened in that region. Why do I think that happened? I think that the ancient religious context connecting back to the Noah mythos, to the Ararat region, and this region created a very serious situation for religious groups and other archaeological groups of having these mysterious megalithic ruins with symbols and types of architecture that didn't match anything from that time period, creating what would have been potentially, and I mean like a firestorm in archaeology at the time. That was when archaeology was really being written in a lot of mainstream books and established into what it is now today. And so now we're just starting to explore these sites in a different and methodical manner. But it's to find that these places were dismantled and to see them like that, it really actually hurts my heart to think that places like that could have been completely either destroyed or removed so that we don't get to know about them and it's hidden from us. It's a very sad thing. And again, I want to say that no current archaeologists that are working on those sites had anything to do with what was previously done to them. And and as I've been told, it was a different time period. That's the answer that I've been given.
And it's like, this is the age-old situation where people in the know think they know what's best for everyone else because of what they know that they can't talk about. And so they do what they think is the right thing. And in doing the right thing, when that's figured out what they did, if this is making sense to people still, if you're following me, it now becomes the wrong thing.
Yeah. And I've had a lot of people tell me, Matt, why do you even bring that up? Like, why don't you just focus on like what the symbols say and talking about, how it could be part of a different civilization? Why bring this stuff up? Because I feel like it's not right to have something that happened bad in the past go unanswered for. I think people need to answer for things that happened that were bad. I don't think that it's okay to let something slip under the rug because it happened a long, long time ago. And so we just don't care about it any longer. Is that okay? Is that morally okay that something destructive that destroyed somewhere very, very sacred and important should just be not discussed because it's a sensitive area? I would rather be on the right side of history to bring the truth about something to light rather than deciding to know something really important and to not talk about it because it's sensitive. I think it's important to be in integrity at all times and to voice the truth and not be afraid of the consequences, because I think the truth is what we really need now.
It's a fair point. It's a very fair point. Unfortunately, human nature is when you can't see the bodies stacked, which in this case, it's not that type of situation. Time heals the wound for enough people that, it doesn't have the pressure to go back and look at it. It's not to say that shouldn't be the case, and it's not to say that something really wrong didn't happen. Sounds like maybe it did. You know, the thing that bothers me about what you're saying is when you talk about the storage of the stuff. That's where I go, oh, okay, there's some shit there. Because if they were just building bases or whatever, they're building fucking bases in Turkey. There's ancient history everywhere. You know what I mean? Like, who knows all the ancient history we haven't uncovered there just because of the nature of the geography. But when you talk about the fact that they're actually taking some of this stuff, dismantling it, and putting it in storage in these places, when you talk about the fact that there are papers in Cambridge University that write about these actions happening and admit to it, I got to look at it. But
I'll send it to you as soon as we're done. Yeah, I'll give it to you.
That's egregious. Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.